Hello, my name is Corey, and I'm a content and support engineer at Geocodio. Geocodio is an amazing tool for any developer looking to incorporate location-based data into their products. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down how to integrate the Geocodio API into a website that will allow users to find and review the contact information of their local congressional representatives. So this is basically going to give us back our congressperson as well as our two senators for whatever district we're in. So let's kind of take a peek at how this works. I already have this example project ready to go. You can actually go onto Geocodio's GitHub and see the code, exactly how I built this out, as well as how we're going to build out the app that we're going to build today. It's all available there. I'm going to include a link in the description below, but definitely feel free to check that out and to play around with it if you'd like. There's a full README to get this up and running. So all we want to do is we basically want to be able to submit an address. So we're going to do a famous one here. I'm not sure of the zip code, but I think it'll still return us something as long as we have a city and state. So if you know anything about DC, they only have a delegate. They don't have a congressperson or two senators. So here we're only going to get back information about Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton. We get her birth date, we get which party she's in, some contact information, phone number, address, website, as well as some social media links to Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. If we wanted to see maybe like a more traditional example of what this would look like for most people, that's what you would get if you were sort of living in DC. But let's say you were living in New York. I went ahead and grabbed the address to the Empire State Building. This is going to give us our sort of three representatives from where we're living. If we're living in New York, right, you're going to see Representative Maloney, Senator Gillibrand, and Senator Schumer. And this is going to give us all the information we need about the folks who represented us, so that we can go and participate in the democracy. So this is really cool information, right? So let's get started kind of mapping out what we need to do to get this up and running if we're trying to create our own version of this application. So what we want is we want a user to be able to submit their address in a form like this one. We want them to be able to submit that address. Then we want to collect that data from the form and send it to our backend. After that, using that form data, we want to return this address with appended data from Geocodio's API that will include information about the congressional district, as well as the representatives within that district. And then finally, we want to render the data from our backend that we're getting back from the API in browser in our front end. So in part one of this series, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build out a Ruby on Rails backend, which will call the Geocodio API using our Rails library that we've built out specifically for Ruby and Rails. And then we're going to return that information, but with a hard-coded address in the Ruby code itself. Then in part two of this tutorial, what I'm going to do is we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive. We're going to build out a React Redux front end that communicates with our backend and kind of brings everything together, displaying this information and allowing us to have a lot more functionality. So we'll be able to basically have this complete project done by the time we're on the other side of this tutorial. So I hope you'll follow along, and let's get started. Okay, so let's get started. I'm super excited about this. I'm going to go ahead and open up VS Code. Cool. All right, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start setting up my backend. So let's go ahead and I'm going to make sort of a directory to put in both the front end and the back end, but we'll obviously start with the back end. So I'm just going to call this Congress Search. And then I'm going to go ahead and CD into that new folder. So let's CD down into there. Sweet. Okay. So we've got our new folder. So what we want to do is we want to generate a Rails application. And I think the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to generate it as an API because there's a lot of Rails stuff that we don't really need when we use a generator. So I'm just going to use the API tag to just give us the bare bones, because really when we're at the end of the day, when we're done this project, most of the work is going to be done in React and Redux. But we're just kind of using Ruby on Rails as like a very, very simple backend. So I'm going to go ahead and generate, let's do Rails new, and then we'll call this Congress Search, since it's a tutorial. And then we will maybe put in tag of API. Okay. So this should create a bunch of stuff for us. Shouldn't take too long, hopefully. And basically, you know, I'm going to explain everything I'm doing, but there will be at least a base level of Rails knowledge and React knowledge that you'll probably need to get through these tutorials. But hopefully, I'll be able to give you most of what you would need to get this done. So obviously, like, I have my local environment set up for Rails and for React, but you know, hopefully you'll be able to get that taken care of beforehand, and then we can just move forward with the tutorial. So that's installed. We are good to go. We've got all of our dependencies. So let's go ahead and then we will open up our search. Boom. Okay. So this is going to be our backend. And we can just get rid of this now, I think. Yep. So you can see now that we've had a bunch of stuff generated for us. We have our app folder, which will include our controllers, our models. We're not really going to do anything with views here, but if you wanted to move forward and instead of using React Redux as your front end, if you wanted to use a purely Ruby on Rails application, and you wanted to build out the front end in Rails, you could absolutely do that. Like, that is a total possibility for you. It would require a little bit of adaptation, but I'm going to build my form in React just because it's where I'm a little bit more comfortable. But if you wanted to build your form in Rails, you could absolutely do that. And a lot of what we're going to learn here today is very specifically going to apply to you. So that's definitely a possibility. But we've got a lot here, and we're going to get this all set up. We're going to do a lot of configuring over the next couple of minutes. But let's kind of dive into that so that we can get coding. So before we do anything else, what we're going to want to do is kind of dive into our gem file and make sure that we have everything that we need to get everything up and running. So I'm going to add a few things here. We're going to add a gem called Geocodio. I'm going to explain what all of these do in just a minute. We're going to install .env Rails. We're going to install Nokogiri. Now, I'm going to say the only reason I'm installing Nokogiri is because the last few times I've built something on Rails, I've gotten some errors in GitHub saying there were some security vulnerabilities with some previous versions of Nokogiri. So I'm specifying this version so I don't run into that again. You don't have to add Nokogiri. We're not really going to do a whole lot with it, but I'm doing it just so I don't run into any possible issues in the future. Leave it up to your discretion for that one, but you're definitely going to want Geocodio and .env Rails. We're also going to go up here and make sure, since we're going to be communicating from a React front end to Rails, we want to make sure we have a CORS path to make sure that that's possible. So we're going to go ahead and comment back in this gem here, rack CORS. So what are all these things going to do for us, right? So obviously, rack CORS is going to give us the ability to permit an external source or origin, in this case, our front end, to retrieve data from our backend. So this is very important because we want to make sure that we're being secure, and it's going to make sure we're able to give that permission to the front end when the time comes. We're not going to use this again for quite a while, but it's important. This Geocodio gem, this is probably the most important part of this particular tutorial. This Geocodio Gem is a library that's going to make using the Geocodio API with Rails a lot easier. So definitely install this. It's gonna help you out a lot. We offer them a bunch of other libraries as well. A Node, a PHP library, a Python library. We've got a bunch of different libraries if you're not coding in Rails. So you can definitely check that out in our documentation, and we kind of give you plenty of information about how to use those in the sort of written documentation we have about the API on the website. .env is what we're going to use to secure our API key, which I'm not really going to show you a bunch of that, obviously, for security reasons, but it is a very important tool that we're going to have to make sure that we can secure away our API key and still use it within the confines of our application. And then I've kind of already explained Nokogiri, but it's mainly just to prevent that error in GitHub. It may or may not be necessary for you in your use case. So to be sure that we've got everything kind of moving in the way that we want it to move, let me save this. I'm going to go ahead and open up a terminal. And generally speaking, you shouldn't have to run a bundle install after installing all these gems, but I'm going to do it just in case. Make sure we've got all of our dependencies that we need. Cool. So we've got all that set up. Now we've just got to do a little bit more configuring, and then we can just dive right in to what we're going to do next. So we've got everything set up in terms of our gems. Let's go ahead and configure a couple of our files so that we can really get started in building up the rest of this backend application. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to secure away our API key in a .env file. And I'm not going to show you everything. I'm going to pause at a certain point because I can't show you my API key. But I do want to at least show you the process of creating a .env because when I was learning how to code, I could not figure this out anywhere. It took me a really long time to work it out just because you can't actually see what a .env looks like in a GitHub. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of show you how this works. So what we want to do is we want to create a new file in our root directory. So we want to go as high as we possibly can. In this case, it's our Congress search tutorial backend file here. And we're just going to create a file called .env. And then what we want to do is we want to create basically a variable called API key. Now, one thing that you definitely want to make sure you do here is you want this to be all uppercase. So that's very important. And then you're going to, in some brackets here, we're going to go ahead, and this is where you would put your API key, right? I'm not going to show you mine, but when the time comes and you're ready to build out your application, this is where your API key is going to go. So in a second, I'm going to stop, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to put my API key in there and make sure it's all set. But we'll go ahead and save this. The next part is the most important part. We're going to go into this file called gitignore. And then we are going to secure this away. I like to always make a note, env file. So basically, now that we've put .env in our gitignore, that means when we go to push this up to GitHub or whatever service that you use, you won't actually be able to see this publicly. So the .env file will only exist for you, and anything that you need to be kept secure, you can kind of put in that .env file, and you can know it's not going to be out there publicly available for other people to consume. So very simple thing to do there, but very important. I'm going to go ahead and take a quick break to add my API key into my application. Again, that's going to go right in here where your API key would go. And then I'm going to add that, and then we'll go ahead and get a little bit deeper into the processes of actually like getting some controllers up and running. Okay, so I've got my API key secured away in the .env file. We're not going to touch that again for the rest of this tutorial. So what I want to do next is I want to generate a resource. This is going to be a very simple backend. All I need is to have basically a single method that allows me to call the Geocodio API, get that response, and then render that response as JSON for our front end to read. That's really all I want to do. And so I think I'm just going to create a single resource called district. And if you haven't used the Rails resource generator, it's magic. So let me show you how this works. We're going to go ahead and generate a resource. And it's going to be called district. Actually had some of that already in there from the last time I built this app. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to see all of the things it's going to create for us. It's going to build a bunch of stuff. So hopefully, oh, I thought I was going to get an error there. So we actually can see in controllers here, this popped up. This is going to be our district controller. It's also going to give us a district's model that we can use. It probably even has some views. Oh, no, it doesn't. Since this is an API, it doesn't give us any views. But if it didn't have that API tag, when we originally created the Rails application, it would give us views. But because we're not really using any views, this is just strictly for API purposes. It's not going to do that. So it's given us that. It's given us, I believe, some migrations probably, which we don't really need. We're not building an internal database. We're pulling information from an external database, but that's okay. We can deal with that. And then that's more or less everything we're going to need to just kind of have a bare bones backend here. So let's go ahead and just so that I don't have to deal with it later on, because we're not really building any actual databases or anything like that internally, I'm just going to go ahead and migrate my databases, the information that we have in there, so that I'm not getting a bunch of errors later on. But if you need to create your own databases for some reason, you can definitely do that, but it's just not something that we're going to need to do in this particular tutorial. So I'm just going to knock that out, and then we're going to go ahead and next step is to add some actions to this controller. All right, so now that we've got our resource generated, we've got our district's controller, we've got our district model, we can go ahead and start thinking about how we actually want to structure the application, how we want to make everything work. We can get to coding. So I think the sort of key thing that we want right now, if we're kind of thinking this through, is we want some kind of method that we can use that will call the Geocodio API. It will pass in an address. In this case, we're going to hard code an address, although later on, we'll kind of show you how to be a little bit more malleable, probably in the second part when we talk more about front end. But for right now, we're going to hard code an address in. We want to get a response from the API that gives us information about that address. And specifically, we want to append information about the congressional district and our representatives. We probably also want to, at the very end of all this, we want to render this as JSON, so that way our front end can read it a little bit easier further down the line. So those are sort of the things we're looking to do. So we're going to do this by using a Ruby library that we have available on Geocodio. It's a third-party library, and it's really cool. It basically is going to allow you to do a lot of stuff that would take a little bit of groundwork, just to be able to do that without having to do too much upfront work. So we're going to require the Geocodio library that we added to our gem file a couple minutes ago. We're also going to require .env Rails, and this is going to be so that we make sure that we get access to that API key, because we're going to need our API key to be able to access the API. So this will kind of pull that information in from our .env file that we set up a couple minutes ago. So let's go ahead and create that method. And this is, again, we're going to keep it real simple here. We're not going to have too many methods in our district's controller. So let's go ahead. We'll create a method called get district. And I always like to put my end in there so I don't forget it. Awesome. So in here, what we're going to want to do is we're going to actually create an instance of this Geocodio Ruby library. So I'm actually going to show you something real quick. So this is our Geocodio API doc, and this is a really great resource if you ever have any questions or if you're just kind of looking for how to get something done. We have a number of libraries from Ruby to Python to PHP, Node. Some of them are third party, some of them we've built in-house, but they're all great resources. And you can see here, you can kind of pick whichever one you want for the circumstances that you're in. So if we go down to geocoding, and what we want to do is put in a single address, we can see here all the things that we need to add to our Ruby file. So we've already got the required Geocodio. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to create this Geocodio variable that will include this library. And then we're going to pass in our API key so that we can easily access it. So let's go ahead here and kind of work through this. We are going to do a, oh, where'd it go? There we go. Do a Geocodio variable. And .new. And then what we're going to do is we're not just going to pass in the API key by itself, obviously, since we have it in our .env file. We're going to do this. We're going to use env, and then we're going to wrap that and then pass in our API key. Actually, just to keep things consistent, I'll do these one ticks instead of 2 ticks. So API key. Cool. So inside these square brackets, we're going to pass in our API key, and this should give us access to our Geocodio variable and get us access to that Ruby library. Then we can create another variable called location, which we're kind of pulling from here. And we can basically now use what's this extra method that we have on our Geocodio object. It's just geocode. And then inside some square brackets, we're going to pass in the address that we want to geocode. So I'm just going to do the White House because that's nice and easy. And we need to make sure we have a street number, the street name, and then at least a city and state or a zip code. So that should give us all that we need right here. Now, we need to do one more thing because we're not just trying to get back the address. If we run this code as it is, all we're going to get back is kind of the same information we've already put in. We want to append these fields. So if we go into our documentation here, you can see that we've got some cool information here about how to append. So what we want is this fields variable, and we want to then do CD, I believe, is going to get us our congressional district. Let's double check that. But yeah, so we want field name CD. Awesome. So this is the information that we need to add in here. So we're going to put in a comma. Then we're going to do fields WCD. Awesome. And then last but not least, we're going to go ahead and render our JSON. We're going to render this location here. Cool. All right, so this is a good starting place, but we actually want to be able to test this out a little bit and see exactly what it is that's going to be returned to us. So let's go ahead and we'll work on some routing so that we can actually try to access this data in our browser. So to get our routes set up, what we want to do is we want to go into this config directory and then find the routes file. And there should be already some sort of pre-populated information here. Since we ran, since we generated the application and we generated this district's resource especially, it's actually already assigned these sort of resources actions to the route. So this will give us like a get action, a create, a destroy, but we don't need any of that. We're, again, not really doing anything with our database in this case. So we're just using the external information from Geocodio. So I'm just going to delete that. And what we want is some kind of action that we can call within our browser that will get us and run that get district action from our district's controller. So we want to use a get action here. And then we want probably the URL to be get_district. Make it nice and easy on ourselves. And then we're going to call the district's controller. And since this is shorthand, we don't have to call it district's controller in this case, just districts. And then we're going to call that get district action from within our controller. So this should be everything we need in terms of getting our routing set up. And then back in our district's controller, we should be able to now run that route and see sort of what we're getting. There's one thing I forgot to do in the last step. And what we want to do here is add a variable .best. And what we want to do here is we want to add the method .best to the end here, because what that's going to do is it's going to basically format the returned information from Geocodio, so it's a little easier for Ruby to read, and that will make this rendering much simpler for us. So we'll do .best there, and then I want to see what we're getting. So I'm going to throw in a debugger here, and I'm going to run our server for the first time, and we'll see if we're getting a response of some kind. This is a localhost 3000. Then what we want to do is tackle on that route, the get district route that we just created. Okay, so we've got an undefined local variable, W. It doesn't like that. It won't even let us run the debugger at this point because it doesn't like that W. Sometimes I've seen in the past, I know that the docs show that you put the colon before fields, but I think when I've actually gotten this to work, I put it after. So let's try that. Let's rerun this server real quick. Hopefully that'll work out for us. But even in situations like this, you're going to run into some errors, and that's okay. Okay. I think we might have hit our debugger now. Cool. So we at least hit our debugger. So we fixed that error. Let's take a look at what location is. All right. So this is our location. We've got a lot of data in this object. So what I like to do in this situation is maybe, because the things that we're actually looking to display, we're not really looking to display the user's information about their address back to them, right? They don't need to see their address. They already know what their address is. So all we really want is the kind of current legislators maybe, or congressional district information. So let's try isolating this down a little bit more so this isn't quite as much code to look at. And let's create another variable that we will call from the location variable. And let's pull congressional districts from there. And let's see what that gives us back in a debugger. See if maybe this is a little, maybe not as messy. Actually going to, just in case, I'm going to rerun the server here. All right, we're hitting that debugger. That's a good sign. So let's see what district is. Awesome. So we can see here that this isn't giving us all of that address information too. This is giving us primarily information about the specific congressional district and the representatives within that district. So I think this is actually perfect for what we want. So what I want to do is, instead of rendering location now, I'm going to render district. And so last step, let's test to see if this is all working. Let's see if it actually renders in the browser. Let's cross our fingers here. Run this Rails. Refresh that. There we go. So now we have a nice JSON object here that we can use on our front end, that we can parse through and grab data from. and it's working, up and running, no errors or anything. And I think we're in a really good spot. So we want to make sure we get that route set up so that we can get to this point and actually have that information available and ready to go online. But yeah, we're in a really good spot now. Let's keep moving. So this is kind of a big deal, right? Like we actually have our backend connected to the Geocodio API at this point. If we were to switch up this address, let's do what we did earlier. Let's find the address for the Empire State Building. And let's pass that in just to kind of see what it would look like to get a different, some different information. So pass that in. We'll run our server. Awesome. And let's see if we get back some new data. There we go. That updates it with information about our New York representatives now. So obviously this is great, but it comes with some big caveats. Hard coding is never a great idea. What we want is something that's a little more malleable, that will allow a user to enter their own address or someone else's address into a form, and then get this data back using that address instead of one that we've just sort of entered in there as a template. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the second part of our tutorial. We're going to stop this one for now. Go grab a snack, get a drink, whatever you need to do. Take a little bit of rest. We did a great job so far. And once you've come back, move on to the next video. And I'll show you how we're going to go about creating the React front end, make this look real pretty. And then we're going to connect the front end and the back end so that we can use this get district method to basically fetch information from Geocodio, send it to our front end, and then render that for the user. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I hope you join me. But until then, thank you for myself and from the rest of Geocodio. We hope you enjoyed this, and we hope we'll see you for the next one.